Rocky Flats is up there, and where are you? That's right. We're happy to have you here today on the steps of the Colorado State Capitol to recognize National Downwinders Day. My name is Nick Hansen, and I am one of the founders of Rocky Flats Downwinders, along with my radioactive wife, or I should probably say hot wife, Tiffany Hansen, over there to my right. As most of you know, Rocky Flats Downwinders are citizens who are concerned about the residents who lived within close proximity to Rocky Flats during its operation as a nuclear weapons plant from 1952 to 1992, and the possible adverse health effects that those residents experienced. We are not unpatriotic. We are not anti-growth. We recognize, more than most, the vital role Rocky Flats played in winning the Cold War. However, that war did not come without consequences, and we believe it is time for our country and our state to face those consequences. Our goals are simple. First, we want Rocky Flats Downwinders to be included as Downwinders under RECA, which is short for the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. Under RECA, Downwinders become potentially eligible for compensation if their illnesses are linked to radiation exposure. Second, we want to sensitize medical professionals to the unique potential health challenges faced by Downwinders so that the medical professionals ask the right questions of their patients and perform the right tests. Third, and if the data supports it, we want to implement a comprehensive medical monitoring program for those individuals who live within 7 miles of the plant between 1952 and 1992. Because it is undisputed that massive radiation leaks occurred at the plant, the next logical step is to determine whether residents who lived near the plant during its operation were negatively affected. In this regard, it is crucial to recognize that despite a multitude of illnesses being reported by Rocky Flats residents over the years, no direct community health survey or medical monitoring has ever been performed. The fact that residents have reported illnesses at seemingly alarming rates is not surprising. After all, Rocky Flats residents were provided no protective gear, and at least for the resident children, had no choice but to live next to the plant and to play in its backyard. It's a moral imperative for further health studies to take place, and if deemed reasonable, medical monitoring to be implemented. If such efforts reveal no adverse health effects compared to the rest of the population, then so be it, and our group will be disbanded. However, if such groups reveal adverse health effects, we will expand our focus to include residents who lived further away from the plant. We are seekers of truth, but at this point no one knows the truth, and no one can say for sure whether Rocky Flats residents were negatively affected. We have 3 speakers here today. Each have a few words they'd like to share with you. Our first presenter is internationally recognized author and professor Kristen Iverson. She holds a PhD from the University of Denver and currently heads the PhD program in literary nonfiction at the University of Cincinnati. Professor Iverson is a Colorado native and author of the well-known book, Full Body Burden, Growing Up in the Nuclear Shadow of Rocky Flats. In reviewing her book, the Atlantic Monthly fittingly described it as a striking tale of innocence in a time and place of great danger, and awarded it Best Book About Justice. Professor Iverson flew out here from Cincinnati to be with us today, and we were so grateful for everything she has done to obtain national attention for our cause. Please give it up to Professor Iverson.
Thank you all for being here. Can you hear me? Everyone can hear me. Thanks to Tiffany, Nick, and Alicia for organizing this event. We are here today to recognize National Downwinders Day. In 2011, the U.S. Senate voted unanimously to designate this day as a National Day of Remembrance for Americans who during the Cold War worked and lived downwind, from nuclear sites. For many of us who love Colorado, who grew up here, who live here, we enjoy our healthy outdoor lifestyle, it's hard to imagine how and why it's important to recognize Downwinders Day here on the steps of the Denver Capitol. I grew up in Arvada. I've lived in Colorado most of my life. I am a Downwinder, like many people in this area, but like others, I didn't know it. Rocky Flats was the biggest secret of my childhood, and for decades it was the biggest secret in Colorado. Even today, many people have never heard of Rocky Flats. Part of this was due to Cold War secrecy. Part of this was due to the emphasis on production over the safety of workers and local residents. Part of this was due to resistance to environmental regulation on the part of the plant, and part of this is due to our own sense of denial. Rocky Flats began production in 1952 at the height of Cold War secrecy. Over the course of almost 40 years, Rocky Flats produced more than 70,000 plutonium pits or triggers, essentially the heart of every nuclear bomb in this country. Each pit, I'm very grateful to the volunteer today who brought a grapefruit. Each pit is roughly the size of a slightly flattened grapefruit. Each pit, 70,000 of them produced right here in Colorado, holds enough breathable particles of plutonium to kill every person on Earth. During the course of production, there was extensive radioactive and toxic contamination on-site and off-site, in the air, in the water, in the soil. There were more than 200 fires at Rocky Flats. The public was not informed. The public was not warned. There was no information available to the public. Two of these fires in particular, one in 1957 and one in 1969, were devastating. A radioactive cloud, the 57 fire happened before I was born. 69 fire happened right after my family moved out there. A radioactive cloud literally traveled over our neighborhood in Arvada and on to Metro Denver. We didn't know about this. We tubed in the ditches on those big inner tubes, you may remember. We rode our horses in the fields around the plant. We swam in Stanley Lake. We had horses and dogs and all kinds of animals. We were outdoors all the time. My parents thought they were raising their four children in the perfect environment, but it was not perfect. What we didn't know was what was happening at Rocky Flats. Workers could not talk about what they did. There were a lot of people in my neighborhood who worked at Rocky Flats, and later, like a lot of the kids that I grew up with, I worked at Rocky Flats myself. Workers couldn't talk about the kind of work they did. Rumors ran wild. In my neighborhood, people suspected that they were making cleaning supplies out there. That's what we had been told. My mother thought for years that they were making scrubbing bubbles. They were not making scrubbing bubbles. You all know the weather here. It's beautiful and sunny today. The wind can be vicious. At our house in Arvada, we were up on a little bit of a hill. The wind was so extreme that the windows rattled all the time. When I worked out at Rocky Flats, it was very common for workers to have their windshields blown out. Think about what that wind, never mind the snow, the rain, all the weather that happens here. The wind picks up whatever is on that site and continues to bring it over areas close to the plant and onto the Metro Denver area. Plutonium was the most significant and dangerous contaminant. Other contaminants include tritium, americium, and carbon tetrachloride, lots of carbon tetrachloride, among others. I grew up near Rocky Flats, and I later worked at the plant myself. Cancer was the common denominator in the families in my neighborhood. But no one knew why, and we weren't supposed to talk. We weren't supposed to ask. Over the course of decades of secret on- and off-site toxic and radioactive contamination at Rocky Flats, vital health information was suppressed. Part of the suppression was our community's own denial. From elementary school and through college and beyond, I knew the stories of countless friends, schoolmates, and co-workers at Rocky Flats who had cancer. Some died. But in my neighborhood, like others where many people worked at Rocky Flats and were sworn to secrecy, Anyone who criticized Rocky Flats or felt their illnesses and cancers were due to Rocky Flats was ridiculed and ignored. Even the workers felt this stigma. Today, the secrecy and the silencing are coming to an end, and we have a rapidly growing data bank of information. Since the publication of my book 3 years ago, I've been deluged with hundreds of stories. With the help of graduate research assistants here in Colorado and also at the University of Memphis and the University of Cincinnati, I began compiling those stories and tracking data. Persistent patterns of disease in residents have quickly emerged. These include brain cancer, testicular cancer, leukemia, ovarian cancer, thyroid cancer, thyroid disorders, and blood ITP, an autoimmune blood disorder. Veterinarians report, quote, an alarming number of cancers in animals, going back to the 1970s, continuing to the present day. Anecdote? Coincidence? Perhaps, but perhaps not. Let me take just a moment to share with you some of these stories. A woman my age went to an elementary school just down the road from mine. Her best friend's father had brain cancer. Brain cancer was common in my neighborhood. The kids she went to school with are now in their early 50s. Many of her childhood friends had cancer. This woman's son had testicular cancer at age 19. Her best friend's son had leukemia. A third friend of hers has ovarian cancer. An Arvada man writes, quote, my cousin was born in Arvada just 5 days after the Mother's Day fire of 1969. At age 16, he developed brain cancer. Other members of my family have also been ill. A group of women who lived near Rocky Flats discovered that each one had struggled to get pregnant and or had repeated miscarriages. 2 of them developed breast cancer. They formed a support group. A woman who grew up near Rocky Flats, now in her 40s, writes, I've had my own health issues, but more importantly, I've buried an obscene number of friends who were stricken with cancer. I've had my own health issues. My family has had health issues that may be due to Rocky Flats. We don't know. My first 2 crushes back in high school got sick. One developed testicular cancer at age 14. Another had to have a tumor removed from his thyroid and later developed prostate cancer at a young age. These stories are not just from people who grew up in the 1960s and the 1970s around Rocky Flats. They continue to the present day. Recently, I received an email from a woman who, in her 30s, living near Rocky Flats with her family, had developed a rare blood disorder, an autoimmune disorder. The family decided she had a baby, and the baby had the same disorder. The family decided to move away. There are other stories like this. Are these mere anecdotes? Is this all just coincidence? Perhaps, perhaps not. Existing studies, what little has been done, provides only partial and conflicting evidence. The truth is, we don't know. With the help of Metro State University's Integrative Healthcare Program, we are beginning to map cancer and disease clusters. I'm working with local universities, including Regis and the University of Denver, to create a database of all of these stories. And this database, all these stories, will eventually be available to the public. But this is a grassroots movement, a growing grassroots movement, but it's not enough. I call on the help and cooperation of local governments and agencies to help us with this crucial project. Based on historic and current patterns of illness and health effects, we must conduct community health surveys, we must have more tests, and we must provide medical monitoring for people who lived or currently live near Rocky Flats. If you live or lived near Rocky Flats, please come forward with your stories. And let's keep the pressure on for full, accurate, and complete reports of on-site and off-site contamination at Rocky Flats, historic and ongoing, and how this may be affecting local families and even local animals. The cost of secrecy, silencing, obfuscation, and partial fact is high in terms of the public health and the health of the environment. We can't change the past, but we can change how we face the enormous legacy and the high-stakes future of Rocky Flats, the former nuclear bomb plant in our own backyard. Thank you for being here.
Professor. Our second presenter is Alicia Casey. She's outspoken, of course, and a community awareness advocate who works with Rocky Flats activists to raise awareness about ongoing contamination concerns. Alicia has played an important role in raising awareness of the dangers presented at the Westminster Hills Dog Park and in stopping a proposed burn last spring on the Rocky Flats Wildlife Refuge. Rocky Flats Downwinders is also proud to have her as a board member. Please give it up for Alicia Casey.
Welcome, everybody. I just want to acknowledge you for being here and what it took to get down here and take time out of your day to lend support for this really important cause. So first I want to thank Tiffany and Nick, the founders of Rocky Flats Downwinders. They worked so hard to put this all together and really tirelessly, and their commitment and dedication is unparalleled. I mean, I'm so fortunate to know them. Nick and I actually had an awesome opportunity last week to speak at Metro to their health sciences classes. And I know some of those students are here, and they're wearing awesome t-shirts, so thank you guys so much for coming. They have agreed to help us with some of the health surveys that the Rocky Flats Downwinders are committed to doing. So thank you guys for coming. And then lastly, Kristen, oh my gosh, thank you. It is an honor to share a stage with you, and thank you for being here and flying out from Cincinnati. I'm just really, I'm touched. So, wow. Anyway, I also want to thank all the community groups. Oh my gosh, I have been working for the last 2 years with amazing set of people. Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center is here. Judith Moore and Leroy, Judith Moeling and Leroy Moore, as well as Rocky Flats Nuclear Guardianship Group is here. Michelle Gabrielle of Parrish with Candelas Glows is here. Amazing individual. All these groups are so essential because they keep the conversation alive. And that's something that really needs to happen. I'm going to talk about that. The concept of nuclear guardianship. Nuclear guardianship, why is this so important? Because the nuclear waste landfill that's at the center of Rocky Flats out there, the contamination there is radioactive. The half-life is 24,000 years. So this conversation needs to be continued and continued and continued until there is absolutely the best land management and nuclear waste management out there that we can have that guarantees that there is no longer any risk of exposure to people out there. So I also want to talk really briefly about some of the current and ongoing issues that are happening at the site, because the plant may be closed, but the story is long, long from over, especially with 24,000 years to go. Sorry, I usually do this on a PowerPoint, so I'm reading off something else that's a little different. I got involved a couple years ago because there is a Westminster Hills open space on Dog Park, which is directly east of the plant site. It is downwind and downstream from all of the contamination at Rocky Flats. And the dogs out there get an alarmingly high rate of cancer. And I know a few of them that got sick pretty early at 5 and 8 and died. And they get bone cancer. And they get bone cancer, and they get cancer between the pads in their paws, which is really odd, right? But it's because they're digging around in the soil out there. They're running, and the plutonium will get in through microscopic cuts in their feet and create tumors in their legs. Veterinarians have been quoted in local papers that saying that they were alarmed, and actually we had one veterinarian that didn't want to move back to Denver because the cancer rates were so high compared to what he saw in dogs in California. So you can imagine if that's happening in the animals, what's happening with the people and what's happening with the children that are recreating out there. So let's talk a little bit about the nuclear waste landfill at the center of the wildlife refuge that's out there. Cleanup means that they buried a lot of the buildings underneath the ground and they paved over portions of it. That's the cleanup. Now, that's very simplified version. There's many documents on that you can read and get a much better picture, but for today, we'll go with that. Now, here's what's really important. Outside of the plant boundaries, they never remediated any of the plutonium that's in the land there. And that's really important, and I'll get to that in a second. So in 2013, Colorado experienced a record flood. So much so that the groundwater at Rocky Flats came back up through all of that waste that was buried there and shifted and moved the pavement, the containment cap as they call it, and moved it. And this was reported on the news. They had to send crews out there to remediate and repave where it had broken. Now, there was no testing done after this event to tell what came up through the soil and what is now in the environment from that flood. The testing stations that were out there took samples, but they were only samples from the very beginning of the flood because nobody could get to the testing stations to change the bottles often to get more samples while the flood was happening. So we don't know how much plutonium moved through the environment. And here's something that's really scary. It's only been 10 years. This containment cap has to last 24,000 years. And it's already cracking and breaking and falling away. We need to build the equivalent of the pyramids out there, really. So in last January, the Colorado Department of Health released a report that talked about how much plutonium is in the fields in the wildlife refuge. And you can find it on the Rocky Flats Stewardship Council website as well. They have their meeting minutes, and they talk about the containment cap that covers the permanent landfill there and how badly it is breaking, slumping, and decomposing. The monitoring stations that monitor movement of this containment cap have either all broken or been disabled because the movement is so great. We're talking 3 feet, and these are supposed to monitor inches of movement. So that's what's happening right now. As of September 2015, they were looking at a study of looking at what they should do about it, and no action has been taken. The next Rocky Flats Stewardship Council meeting is February 1st. I encourage everyone to go and speak up. Let your voices be heard. So they released this report, Colorado Department of Health releases this report. They tell you about all this plutonium that's in the field that they're going to burn because U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service got a permit, and they said, hey, we're going to do a controlled burn out there because we need to do some weed mitigation because the housing is coming in. So this was a field right behind the Candelas development. And so it was incredible to watch the firefighters get up and talk about how they're going to dig up the plants as they burn, and they dig these trenches and they expose the roots so that the plants are mitigated and taken out. But that's how they mitigate the radiation, and they hold it in place. It's the grasses and the plants that are out there right now that are protecting us from all the plutonium that's in that field right now, getting carried by the wind that Kristen just talked about and blown into the Denver metro area. So I worked with just amazing people, a lot of the groups I mentioned earlier, and because of their contributions and many others, a lot of local scientists in the area, and we stopped the burn that would have released a plutonium. Thank you. It would have released a plutonium cloud over Denver metro area and creating a whole nother generation of downwinders. So I ask, how is this responsible land or nuclear waste management? And how is it prudent to allow people and their families to recreate on a wildlife refuge with known contaminants in it? And why would you want to let your family recreate to the top of a nuclear waste dump? At this point, I see generations of downwinders, unfortunately. With housing developments out there and a toll road slated to go right through the center of it, it's really important that we do these health studies that Kristen and Nick and Tiffany are advocating for. Because I know when we have the real impact of what's happening and what people are actually dealing with, ongoing health monitoring will become available, responsible nuclear waste management, and better signage and disclosures for the families that continue to move into that area. So before I turn it over to Tiffany, I just want to mention We have a ton of awesome materials up here. We've got contamination maps. We've got information on the dog park and open space. We've got information about Rocky Flats Downwinders, how you can get in touch with us, how you can participate in our health survey, how you can get on and get in touch with these awesome people. We've got some great history books about the history of Rocky Flats from the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center. So all of these are up here. We've also got an email list you can get on so that you can get regular emails from us and regular updates, and also communicate with us about your concerns about what's happening in the area. And with that, I want to introduce Tiffany Hansen. She is, hold your applause, she is an incredibly strong and powerful woman who really is the genesis of all of this. And I have come to know her over the last few years, and her taking this project on is so important. Like, what happens with this project makes the difference. So please welcome her. Thank you so much.
It's an honor to be here today to recognize Downwinders on National Downwinders Day. Many women, men, and children, as well as future generations, have suffered and continue to suffer negative health implications due to living near or working in nuclear test sites, reactors, and weapons plants. Let's have a moment of silence to recognize Downwinders locally, nationally, and globally. Many of us here know the horrors of Rocky Flats. Many people have been personally impacted. Others may have loved ones or friends that have fallen ill and passed away. The thing that we must do is continue to tell these stories and document them. Luckily, Rocky Flats Downwinders, as a community organization, is working with Metro State University's Integrative Healthcare Program to create and distribute a health survey that will allow former residents to self-report health histories. We will then map disease and cancer clusters. This will allow us to document specific illnesses, occurrences of illnesses in relation to location of residents. If the data supports it, we will move to request more health studies and ultimately demand medical monitoring. Our work is just beginning. As a community, we need to remember our nuclear legacy, good or bad. We need to heal, and in order to do so, we need to talk. We need to continue to build awareness so medical professionals can be sensitized to the unique challenges facing Downwinders. We need to build awareness so we can reach out to former residents who have moved away and may be facing health challenges alone. Unfortunately, the story of Rocky Flats is not an isolated one. Our story and the health problems facing Downwinders is very similar to health problems facing those near Hanford, Washington, Coldwater Creek, Missouri, and others. We must honor the memory of Rocky Flats so every former resident and every former worker is protected from here on out through a comprehensive medical monitoring program. Much damage has been done, but that doesn't mean we turn our backs on former residents or workers. Human health is a gift. It is delicate, and our beautiful state of Colorado, as well as the United States, needs to take care of citizens whose health was sacrificed for national security. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out, especially everyone who talked today, everyone who joined us. Thank you for coming and recognizing National Downwinders Day. I thank you in advance for continued efforts to raise awareness, share these stories so that we can continue to document them. And please enjoy the rest of this beautiful Colorado day, and thank you again for coming out, and thank you for your support.